The first snow hadn't yet fallen, but the air already carried its scent, sharp, metallic, like cold iron and quiet dread. The cottonwood tree at the edge of Mara Jansen's land had lost most of its leaves, and what remained clung like ghosts too stubborn to let go. From its highest branch, a length of coarse rope swayed, darkened by weather and memory. It creaked when the wind moved east. Mara never looked directly at it, but she felt it. She moved through the world like a shadow of herself, thinner than she once was, her frame wrapped in her late husband's coat, too wide in the shoulders. Her neck bore a crescent scar, purple and puckered, where the noose had bitten into her flesh just 3 weeks before. She limped now, one leg half frozen from the 2 nights she'd hung unconscious and half dead from that tree, swaying in the wind like the rope that betrayed her. No one from town had come looking. She'd saved herself, dragging her broken body home across frostbitten grass, fingers torn and bloody, eyes full of vengeance and something far colder. She did not scream. She did not cry, not even when the crows came. That morning, she had just lit the stove when she heard the horse. The sound was distant at first, a slow, deliberate hoofbeat, not the frantic gallop of a man escaping something, but the kind of ride a man takes when he's bringing something home. Mara stepped to the window and pushed aside the thin muslin curtain. The glass was warped, old and full of bubbles that made the world outside look like it was underwater. The rider came into view. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, wearing a wide black hat, face obscured by dust and the rising steam of his horse's breath. The animal was dark as oil, its flanks wet with sweat despite the chill. Across the saddle horn was a bundle wrapped in red cloth. He didn't come to the door. He dismounted and walked to the barn, where he tied his horse and stood, not moving, not speaking, not knocking, just standing. She watched him for a full hour. He didn't flinch. The wind picked up. The rope on the cottonwood creaked softly, like an old man's breath. Finally, Mara opened the door. She stepped out slowly, boots crunching on dry grass. She didn't call to him. She didn't ask his name. Her hands were wrapped in gray wool mittens, her shoulders hunched from pain she never acknowledged anymore. He turned to her as she approached. His face was sharp, not young, but not yet old, eyes like coal, skin weathered by sun and smoke. He said nothing. He reached down and untied the red cloth from his saddle. A shawl, bloodstained, bundled around something heavy. He held it out to her. Mara took it, not because she wanted to, but because something in her recognized it, the color, the stitching. It had been hers once, years ago. She hadn't seen it since the night she was dragged from her home, screaming into a bag. She unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside was a skull. It was clean. No flesh, no hair, no eyes, but a silver tooth still glinted where the left canine used to be. She knew that tooth. She knew that laugh. One of them. One of the 3. She looked up at the man, eyes glassy but dry. "You follow him long?" she asked, her voice like gravel and ice. He nodded once. "Others? Not yet." She looked down at the skull again. Then she turned and walked back toward the house. She didn't say thank you. She didn't invite him in. Later, through her crooked window, she watched him build a small fire beside the barn. He didn't unpack much, just a saddle blanket, some dried meat, and a piece of flint. He worked slow, deliberate, as if he'd done it every day of his life. When night came, she could still see the glow of the fire, flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. He sat beside it, cross-legged, head bowed, silent. Inside, Mara sat in her rocking chair, shawl around her shoulders, fingers worrying at the edge of the cloth, like she was pulling threads from the past. She glanced toward the cottonwood. The rope was still there, swaying in the night wind, its loop wide open, waiting for something, or someone, to fill it again. She didn't sleep. Neither did he. And neither of them said the word justice. Not yet. But the fire outside crackled like an omen. The days passed without words, the way winter passes over graveyards, slow, quiet, and bone-deep. Mara wore her husband's coat at the table. She always had. It hung heavy on her shoulders, smelling faintly of cedar smoke and old whiskey, the lining frayed beneath the arms. When she sat to eat, black coffee and beans, sometimes just dry bread, She didn't take it off. It was not warmth she sought from it. It was weight, presence, proof she hadn't imagined him. She ate in silence, across from the empty chair he once occupied. She never moved it. The chair remained, always facing the window, as if waiting for someone who'd only gone out to split wood. Outside, the rope and the cottonwood still swayed. It had happened in late spring, before the heat dried up the creek. The claim office in town had been burned by vigilantes weeks before, so all land disputes were settled with lead and bluff. Mara had the deed. Her husband, Ellis, had ridden 30 miles for it, paid in full. But papers meant nothing to the men who wanted the land. 3 of them, riding under no banner but violence, calling themselves law because no one dared say otherwise. They'd come at dusk. Ellis had stepped outside with his rifle. He told Mara to lock the door. She didn't listen. The shot was so quick it barely echoed. Ellis fell where he stood, face down in the earth he'd claimed, boots still planted like he meant to rise again. They didn't even bury him. Mara did, by herself, under the sycamore tree behind the barn, where the grass grew soft in spring, and he used to read to her from tattered books he'd bought with spare coin. She carved the marker with a chisel, hands shaking. E.J. a good man. That's all it said. After the funeral that never was, she stayed. Folks in town told her to leave, to sell, to forget. She didn't. Couldn't. They said the men who shot Ellis had left the county. They lied. 3 months later, they came back for her, claimed she'd forged the deed, that a woman alone had no right to that much land. She didn't remember much from that night, just burlap over her head, fists like hammers, and the dry bark of the cottonwood as they dragged her toward it. The noose smelled like oil and rust. The world went black before the stars did. Now, in the brittle days of approaching frost, Calder remained. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He didn't enter the house. But each morning, Mara noticed the world slightly changed. The back fence was fixed, rails straightened and hammered firm. The firewood stack doubled overnight. Her wagon wheel, cracked for weeks, sat fully mended, a new bolt gleaming like moonlight. She never saw him work. He moved like smoke, quiet as regret. Sometimes, she caught him walking the ridge at sunset, rifle slung across his back, silhouette dark against a bleeding sky. A lone sentinel, or a ghost. She wasn't sure which. One evening, while looking for twine in the attic chest, Mara found the wedding dress, folded between yellowed linens and a broken lantern. It was moth-bitten and stiff, the lace eaten in places, silk faded to the color of parchment. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in months. She carried it downstairs and shook the dust from it, hung it on the line, not to clean it, just to see what remained. The fabric swayed gently beside her laundry, empty arms fluttering like wings that would never fly. She stood on the porch that evening, watching the hem twist in the breeze. Calder passed by with his horse. He paused, looked at the dress for a long moment, then walked on. No questions, no words. But Mara felt something shift, not in him, perhaps, but in her. The silence between them no longer felt hollow. It felt held. That night, wind moaned through the cracks in the window. The fire popped in the stove. Mara sat in her husband's chair, the one that faced the window. Her hands rested on the table, not trembling, not clenched, just still. The rope in the cottonwood was hard to see now. The moonlight caught it only in pieces, a loop, a line, a shadow. She remembered Ellis's hands, calloused, warm, and the way he used to trace her spine with a fingertip before rising to tend the cattle. She remembered his favorite song, and how he hummed it when he didn't think she was listening. She remembered his blood on her apron. She remembered all of it, and still she did not cry. Outside, Calder stood beneath the stars, eyes toward the hills, a man who had seen too much and spoke too little. But Mara didn't need to hear his story to feel it. Some things, like scars, explain themselves. The snow came hard. It began as a whisper, just a few white flakes tumbling from a pewter sky. But by nightfall, the land had vanished beneath a blanket of silence, as though the world had been erased and rewritten in white. The wind howled across the prairie like something grieving. Mara was chopping turnips in the kitchen when she heard the hoofbeats. They were uneven, frantic, not the steady rhythm she'd come to expect from Calder's patrols. She stepped outside. boots crunching over the hardening ground. That's when she saw him. Calder slumped in the saddle, his coat soaked with snow, his head hanging low. His horse staggered, favoring one leg, nostrils flaring with each laborious breath. He didn't speak. He collapsed sideways, hitting the frozen earth with a sound like a dropped sack of grain. Mara didn't panic. Panic was for people who had something left to lose. She moved quickly, dragging him inside with effort. He was heavy, muscle and blood and weight, but she'd hauled heavier burdens before. She cleared a spot near the stove, rolled up a blanket, and cut away his coat with her late husband's knife, the one with the handle worn smooth by time and grief. Blood soaked his shirt, dark and sluggish, oozing from beneath his ribs. She lit the lantern. The wound was clean, though deep. Bullets still inside. She boiled water, gathered the dried herbs from the cabinet above the stove, angelica root, sweet yarrow, a scrap of bare wheat. She remembered how old woman Luda, a Cheyenne friend from years ago, once treated Ellis when a tool shattered in his hand. Luda had taught her the plants, taught her how to pull infection without pulling the soul. Mara didn't hesitate. She worked through the night. By morning, the snow had reached the windowsill. The storm howled like judgment, but inside, the fire burned steady. Calder didn't wake. She found the photograph by accident, tucked in the folds of his satchel, between rounds of ammunition and a folded strip of rabbit hide. The image was faded, cracked along its corners. A woman, native, dignified, eyes like river stone, stood beside a child with hair braided tight to the scalp. The child's smile was faint but honest. There was a fire behind them, a canvas tent, a kettle hanging from a branch. The photo had been handled often. The edges were thumb-worn. Mara stared at it for a long time. Then she set it gently back in the bag. By the second day, Calder's fever had bloomed. His skin turned slick, breath shallow, muscles twitching beneath his blanket. He whispered in his sleep. Not in English, not in any tongue she recognized, but the sound of it stirred something inside her chest. She sat beside him through the evening, soaking cloth in snowmelt, pressing it to his brow. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like dry wood. "I didn't ask you to come here," she said. He didn't respond. "I didn't ask you to kill him, or bring that skull." The wind howled against the house, rattling the shutters. "I buried a man once," she continued, staring into the stove's fire. "And I thought that was the end of burying. But death don't wait for permission, does it?" The flames flickered. She sat back in the rocking chair. "I've forgotten how to be anything but alone." She didn't speak again, but she didn't leave the room either. On the third morning, the storm broke. The sky lightened to pearl. Snow still drifted, but the wind had calmed, as though the land had exhaled. Mara stepped outside to tend the horse, its leg bandaged, its flanks still shivering. As she passed the clothesline, she noticed it. The red shawl, the same one Calder had used to wrap the skull, fluttering now in the soft wind, half buried in snow. She hadn't put it there. He must have. It moved like a flag in the breeze, not a banner of war, but of memory. She left it there. By midday, Calder stirred. His eyelids fluttered. His mouth opened and closed. Words stuck in the back of his throat. Mara was at the table, mending a torn glove. He exhaled something soft, a name maybe, or a place. The language rolled like river stone across his tongue. She turned. "You're alive," she said. He tried to rise, winced. She came to his side, put a hand on his shoulder, gently pushed him down. "You're not ready," she said. He looked at her, really looked, like he was seeing her not as a shape or figure, but as a person, as someone who'd stayed. "I saw them," he whispered. "The others. I'll finish it." "You'll do no such thing," she said flatly. "Not until that fever's gone, and your ribs don't creak when you breathe." He blinked slowly. "Why'd you let me in?" he asked. Mara thought about it. "I didn't," she said. "You fell. That night." She placed a second chair beside the fire. She didn't sit in it. Not yet. But she placed it there, all the same. Just in case. The blizzard had passed, but the silence remained. Not cold, not cruel, just present. Like smoke that lingered in a room long after the fire had gone out. Calder stayed on the property. He never said why. Mara never asked. He slept in the barn still, though she'd offered the cot by the hearth one night, with a nod toward the door and a single word. If. He hadn't replied, but he hadn't left either. By day, he walked with a slow limp, ribs stiff under his coat, one hand always near the butt of his pistol. He worked, without invitation or complaint, mending fence rails, feeding the stock, patching the hole in the barn roof with scavenged tin and old nails. Mara watched from the porch, coffee in hand, her breath misting in the air. One morning, she handed him a tin cup without a word. He took it, tasted it, grimaced faintly. Too bitter. She shrugged. That's how I take it. He nodded, then finished it anyway. They spoke in fragments. Short things. Useful things. Storm coming. Your horse favors his left. You still bleed when you stretch. Only a little. Nothing resembling conversation. But it was more than nothing. And in the quiet, they noticed each other. One night, she found him seated by the barn, near the fire pit, working leather with slow, deliberate fingers. She leaned against the doorway and watched, unnoticed, or at least unacknowledged. He was braiding a lasso from an old whip, the strands dark and weather-worn. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but memory. The kind of memory that didn't speak English. The kind that sat in the bones. She stepped closer. You've done that before, she said. He didn't stop. Long time ago, he muttered. She sat on the low fence, boots in the straw. You were a wrangler? No, he said. They just made me do it. He paused, eyes flicking to her. I used to think you could pull a man out of the fire with rope, if you tied it right. She didn't answer. Not yet. What about the woman in your picture? She asked instead. He tied another loop. Pulled it tight. Let the silence stretch. They burned her house, he said, voice flat. Took the boy. She waited. That's all. He nodded once. That's all. That night, Mara sat in front of the mirror, one cracked from corner to corner, and opened the old cedar box that had held her brushes and ribbons for years. Dust rose like perfume when she lifted the lid. She found her comb. Her fingers moved slowly, unsure at first, but certain in the way ritual returns. She parted her hair in three, drew the first braid in silence, then the second. By the third, her eyes stung. She hadn't braided her hair since Ellis was alive, since the morning she wore the wedding dress and smiled without fear. When she stepped outside to gather the wash, Calder was splitting logs nearby. He paused, saw her. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't smile. But he saw her, all of her, and that was enough. The next day brought wind, but no storm. They worked side by side for hours, him hammering shingles back onto the lean-to, her hauling water from the pump. Their shadows stretched long in the afternoon sun, overlapping now and then, like strangers too tired to remember they were strangers. Dinner was quiet cornmeal, root stew, hot coffee. The smell of cedar bark and lye soap lingered in the corners of the room. Mara set the tin plates down. Calder sat with his coat folded over the back of the chair, one arm in a sling, a scar visible along his collarbone. She looked at him, long and direct. Why the skull? He didn't blink. You brought it to my porch, she said, wrapped in my shawl. Why? He set down his fork. Because no one else would. The words dropped like stone into a still pond. Then he rose and walked out without finishing the plate. She didn't follow. She sat in the quiet. The fire crackled. The wind shifted. Outside, the red shawl still hung from the line, stiff with snow, twisting gently in the evening breeze, like a flag raised not for war, but for remembrance. Mara reached up to her braid, thumbed the tightest part, and held it there, not to pull it loose, just to feel the strength in something she'd made herself. That night, she left the door unlatched. Didn't say why. Didn't need to. The snow began to melt. It didn't rush, it receded. A slow withdrawal, like something reluctant to leave. Water whispered beneath the crust of ice, soaking into the earth as the world stirred from its long, frozen hush. The cottonwood dripped. Mara stood on the porch, watching as the sun warmed the ground enough for the crows to return. Their cries echoed faintly through the canyon, sharp and hungry, but alive. She was starting to feel that again, life. Not in her chest, not in her breath. Somewhere deeper. That week, Calder brought her something. He didn't announce it. She only noticed when she stepped onto the porch one morning and found a new rocking chair beside the door, rough-hewn, uneven in places, but sturdy. The wood was salvaged pine, smoothed with care, the joints tight, the arms broad. He stood by the railing, rubbing pitch from his palms. "You made this?" she asked. He nodded. "Used what I could find in the shed." Mara ran her hand along the backrest. It creaked slightly beneath her touch. She sat. It rocked true. "I missed this," she said, almost to herself. Calder only nodded again, then returned to repairing the fence, as though he hadn't given her anything at all. In return, Mara made the stew. It was a simple thing: venison, dried beans, salt, and rosemary. The same recipe she used to make before everything went quiet, before the rope, before the blood soaked into her porch and memory. The scent filled the cabin by dusk, curling through the rafters like something sacred. She set 2 bowls on the table. Calder stepped in without being called. They ate slowly, not with conversation, but with acknowledgement, and that was more than enough. Later that night, under a moon that looked like polished bone, Mara stepped into the yard carrying something wrapped in linen. Calder stood near the barn, tying up a coil of rope. She didn't look at him. She walked to the fire pit, the one where he often sat with his back to the wind, and knelt beside it. She placed the bundle down gently, unwrapping the yellowed remains of her wedding dress. The silk was stiff, the lace curled in on itself like withered flowers. Moth holes marked the bodice. A single button had survived, glinting faintly in the moonlight. She built the fire slow. Dry twigs, pine kindling, old fence slats. She struck the flint. The flame took quickly, licking at the hem, the bodice, the sleeves. She didn't move back. She didn't flinch. She stared into the fire like it was something that owed her answers. Calder approached without speaking. He watched from a few steps behind, then finally came to sit beside her on the cold stone ring. He pulled a small tin flask from his coat and offered it wordlessly. Mara took it. The liquor stung. It always did. She passed it back. Their hands touched for a heartbeat too long. "I wore it the day Ellis said we'd never have to be afraid again," she murmured. Calder said nothing. The fire crackled. She looked at him sideways. The firelight caught the lines of his face, not soft lines, but true ones. Scars, too. A map of what he'd survived. "You loved her," Mara said. His jaw tightened. "She was kind," he replied. "Too kind for a world like this." He looked into the fire. His voice grew low, almost cracked. They were hiding in the church. Town claimed they were giving safe harbor to hostiles. Some ranchers set fire to it, said they were purging the land. He didn't speak for a long moment. "I got there too late." Mara closed her eyes. "What was her name?" she asked. "Anissa," he said. "Our son was named Elias." He swallowed hard. "They died without me. But I gave them the chance to hope. That was the last good thing I did." The fire popped, one ember leaping skyward, vanishing into the dark. "You brought me a skull," she whispered. "But what you gave me was breath." Again. He didn't turn. Just passed her the flask once more. She drank. Their shoulders met. Neither moved away. They sat there until the last piece of the dress curled into ash. No kiss passed between them. No confession. Just her head, gently resting on his shoulder, and the wind carrying the final threads of silk into the stars. In the morning, the fire pit held only gray dust and faint warmth. The shawl on the line had blown loose in the night. Mara caught it by the edge before it drifted too far, and folded it softly, pressing it once to her chest before placing it in the cedar box with the rest of her remembered things. Then she stepped outside to where the rocking chairs waited. 2 now, both facing the open field, and the world, somehow, had grown just a little wider. The wind carried news the way it always did out here, on the back of a trader's mule, in the slant of a barkeep's whisper, across the porch planks of a station house 2 valleys over. The last 2 men who'd lynched Mara Jansen were alive. One worked silver ore in a mining town west of Twin Bluffs. The other had taken up with a claim jumper gang, riding border lines and hiding in the pine hollows. They weren't ghosts, after all. They were men, and men could be found. Calder wrapped his rifle in canvas before dawn. His saddlebag was already packed. He didn't tell her goodbye. He thought she'd still be asleep. But when he stepped onto the porch, she was there, hair braided down her back, coat buttoned, her husband's revolver holstered at her hip. He stopped. "I'm coming with you," she said. He studied her for a long moment, not questioning her will, only measuring the weight of it. At last, he nodded once, then mounted. She followed, and together they rode into the cold morning, not as lovers, not even yet as friends, as witnesses, as unfinished stories. The mining town rose from red clay like something dug up from the earth, timber-frame saloons, canvas tents flapping in the wind, coal smoke clinging low like fog. They didn't ask for names. They didn't need to. The man they sought was drinking from a tin cup outside the smelter, his beard full of ash. When he saw them dismount, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, then guilt, then fear. He ran. They didn't chase him in a gallop. They walked. They found him near the creek, hunched and gasping, pistol dropped in the mud, blood spreading from his side. He'd tripped, or fate had caught him. Calder knelt beside him, not with vengeance, with gravity. The man tried to speak. Couldn't. Mara stood behind, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. She said only this: "You remember the tree." He wept, and then he stopped breathing. The second man vanished. A ranch hand claimed to have seen him riding into the pines, saddle loaded with coin and panic. Calder followed for half a day, then turned back. "There's no need to catch a man already running from himself," he said. Mara didn't argue. Some justice wears no boots. They returned 2 days later. The snow had fully melted now. The ground was wet and smelling of earth, fresh green, full of promise. Birds had come back. The air no longer bit. When they passed the cottonwood tree, Calder paused. The rope still hung there, its noose blackened, its fibers stiff with old weather and older grief. Mara dismounted. She climbed the small rise with purpose. She reached into her saddlebag, drew the hatchet Calder had sharpened before they left, and with a single, clean motion, cut the rope free. It dropped like a dying vine, coiled in the dirt at her feet. She didn't speak, just gathered it in her arms and carried it to the fire pit. She lit the flame herself. No ceremony, just release. The rope crackled, curled, then crumbled. That night, Calder stepped into the house, without his coat on. He placed his saddle near the door, neatly, like a man meaning to stay, and pulled off his boots. Mara handed him a blanket without words. He draped it over his legs as he sat in the old chair, the one he'd built for her, now duplicated for him. They didn't speak about what they'd done. The dead didn't need retelling. Only the living did. Morning came with gold light and the scent of boiling coffee. The world was soft again, gentle even. The cottonwood stood tall in the distance, no rope upon its branches, only new buds. They sat on the porch, rocking side by side. Steam curled from their tin mugs. The wood creaked softly beneath them, the music of chairs and peace. Mara's braid lay loose against her shoulder. She shifted slightly, and without asking, let it rest against his. Calder didn't move. Didn't need to. No kiss passed between them. No vow. But for the first time in a long, long while, they were not alone. And that out here was as close as love ever needed to speak.